Okay, we started out learning a little bit about the layout objects at the end of last class. We talked about page layout and how it's cast from active view. And we talked about how page layout also has an iGraphics container, just like the view did that we did earlier in the semester. We talked about some of the common properties and methods that we would use with iPage layout, iActiveView, and iGraphics container related to a page layout. We also reviewed how elements are broken up into graphic elements, which are okay on either a layout or a data frame, and frame elements, which are only usable on a layout, like a north arrow and so on. And that's where we're going to pick up in a second. We talked about some of the weird set of objects with a layout, such as the map frame and map surround. In a layout, map frame is where the map is stored in, and a map frame has associated with a map surround frames. A map surround frame is a frame containing a north arrow, a legend, a scale bar, etc. But the map surround frame is not the north arrow itself, it's the container for it. The actual class representing the north arrow, scale bar, legend, and so on is the map surround class, because it's contained in a map surround frame. Seems like too many steps. And then we built an example where we looked at looping through using graphics container, testing what type of object each one of the frames is. We also looked at some code to click on a page layout and add a piece of text showing the current file path and date and username on the layout. So now, what we'll do next is look at an add-in button that adds a legend to the map frame. We'll add a legend to our frame automatically. So some of the code that you'll see here, we get to the map, the map document like we always have, but then I'm retrieving the page layout with ActiveView instead of Focus Map. So there's a difference right away. I'm also going to initialize map variables for the map surround and the frame that will contain the legend that we make, cast from ActiveView. So I'm creating a variable for map surround frame, and for the graphics container. We need to do something else in this case, which is unusual and I think a little bit silly. We need to find the UID of the map frame and set its value that way. So if I were to start a project, I'll create an add-in button. So as I wrote in the slide, we'll get the map documents page layout. Oh, that's weird. Oh. And here's where I get the page layout. And we'll initialize some variables like I mentioned a moment ago. And I'll get graphics container casted from the active view. So you can actually, there's a method that we'll see now that to find the map frame in a layout. So to do that, we can use we'll go like we've traditionally done. We'll get the focus map, and I'm going to set map frame so we'll get the focus map, and then with graphics container you can use a method called find frame to locate the frame that is associated with that focus map and then cast it to an IMAP frame. So this is how you can take a focus map classed object and find its frame on a layout. And as I mentioned, when doing it this way, we need to set the object's GUID, its unique identifier. I can never find that list. It's hard to track down. There we go. When creating a map surround, we need to find the GUID associated with that object. I think this is it. find it. Developer help. I hide things well. Objects.net. Where the heck is this? I'll just type what we have. Esri system. Okay. So we create the UID class object. And set it to the UID of the legend. So now we define the location of the map frame using an envelope. We talked about envelopes a number of times already. Create an envelope to define the location of the map surround. But note that because this is a layout, this isn't map coordinates, but these are put coords is now coordinates on the page. From the left, upper left of the page. So this is, we're creating an envelope starting 1 inch from the top and left and then ending 4 inches from the top and left. Oh, that might be where it is. It's not in there anymore. Let's take a look. So now we'll create this. Now that we have the UID and the envelope, let's create a surround frame. and create a map surround and set the map surround's name to legend. And then we'll create an element cast the map surround frame to an element, and now that it's an element, we can add it to the graphics collection. We need to assign the element's geometry. And here's where we add the element which was cast from the map surround frame to the graphics container. Let's see if that works. This is the list of UIDs that I had pasted into the slides, which I can't seem to find anymore in the help. But these are the list of all the different UIDs for creating. This is the list of possible map surround frames. Most of them are scale bar related. There we go. Add some layers. And there's our result. The legend was that. I guess it's an inch to 4 inch from the bottom. You could add a second legend if we want. So our first example of working with a layout. Well, first today. There was some yesterday too. There's another class called a style selector. Style selector classes and objects are used to utilize the default style selector when the user changes or wants to select a surround. Style selectors are in the Carto UI namespace. I have to remember to add that. Style selector is abstract, and you may be familiar with a lot of these from using ArcMap. It inherits from specific selectors such as north arrow selector. That's what you see here, where the user gets to choose what north arrow goes on the map. Label style, background, and so on. Style selector classes and objects can be used to utilize the default menus to allow the user to choose a category. So we actually need to reference Carto UI and System UI, two things we don't normally do. So we'll write some code to show how to utilize a style selector. So we'll create a north arrow and a style selector for north arrow. And north arrow is north arrow, of course. And then we create an style selector interfaced object with the class that we're interested in, which would be north arrow selector class. We use a method called doModal to open the selector for us. And a modal window takes control of your application. That's what we mean by modal. When a modal window is open, nothing else can occur in your application until the modal window is closed. So to do this, I'm going to create a Boolean variable. I'll call it choice, because doModal returns a Boolean. And we pass the window handle, the Windows window handle of ArcMap. And I said if choice returns false, the user hit cancel and they didn't actually select any arrow. So we would exit at that point. If it's true, we can then retrieve the arrow that was chosen. When it comes in an array, on some, I don't think you can actually do it with arrows, but you can shift click and select multiple things in some cases. So the selector returns an array. And to do that, we assign to the arrow, casting to iNorth arrow, the selector get style 0 at the array index of 0, the first one. So we'll now have as our arrow the arrow that the user chose. Now let's get the current data frame and assign it to the north arrow. You could have, if you imagine your layout might have multiple data frames, and one of the data frames might be rotated. So you need to think about making sure the north arrow is attached to the proper data frame. And we do that by assigning the arrow's map property, and you assign it to the focus map in this case. We'll just assign it to the active data frame. There might be cases where you would want to go seek a specific data frame. We'll just do this for this example. So if you remember the map, we need a map surround frame to display a map surround like a north arrow. So just like we did for the legend a moment ago, we'll create a map surround. And we'll assign the map surround, not map surround, typo. We'll assign the map surround to P arrow, the arrow we just retrieved. I'll copy and paste when it comes to this point, we're creating an envelope and adding it as an element, just like we did a moment ago. So I'll copy and paste that code. And let's run this. Uh-oh, errors. I copied and pasted and never declared graphics container. So notice the light cancel, it goes away. The north arrow selector comes up. I can select one, and it added it to the map for us. And it added the one that I chose. Unless I choose a different one, that's the one that'll be added. Any questions? And there's the result in the screenshot in the lecture as well. We will now learn how to change page sizes using the iPage interface. Note that we can set some other key aspects of the page layout page, such as a page orientation, units, background color, and so on. In the example here, and we'll add a Windows form. I'll call it form page size. And I'll add two text boxes for where the user can enter their new width and page size. And a button. So we need to go into the designer of the form and change the controls to public, at least for text width and text height. A couple had this happen in the Willard's not here. He had for some of these revert to private when he had a lab. Setting this to public now makes the text width and text height visible throughout the project. So the way we're doing this, that's how we're going to have to, we need to add that. Button change will just close the form. Most of the code will be on the on-click event of the add-in, which I haven't created yet. I'll copy the using statements from one of our existing examples. So on the click event, I'm going to retrieve the page layout. And open the form that we created. I'll create two numeric variables. So when the form is closed, grab the numeric values that were entered. So we're going to put that in a try block. And we'll put a catch block for, say, if the user didn't enter numbers like they should have. And this doesn't really fit into anything, but just to show you how to do it, I'm showing you code to get the current page size. Using the printable bounds property on iPage. I will write it to the debug window. And an envelope has a width and height property. So now let's change the page size with what the user entered. We'll also stretch graphics, so that's an option on layout. We'll stretch the graphics to match the new page size. And that's done with the pPage property set stretch graphics with page. And then a page has a method put custom size, and we can give it the width and the height. We have to do one other thing. We set the orientation. If the width is greater than the height, this is a landscape page. Say the width is 10 inches and the height is 5 inches, it's a landscape page. So we need to set the orientation to 1, which stands for landscape. If the height is larger, then it's a portrait or p-page of 2. And then we'll redraw. Let's give this a shot. So that automatically changed the page size. If I go back to the debug window, it showed, now that it's actually the printable page size, so it's not completely in F by 11, but 8.16 times by 10.6. So it showed the printable page size on the page from that code that I wrote up here. Where was that? Printable bounds. Any questions? That's the end of the layout set. Well, sort of. The next topic is related. We've got 2 more topics which are shorter, and then we'll finish. The next topic we're going to talk about exporting. Taking a map layout and exporting it to an image, which is also kind of strange the way it's done. The interface used for doing that is iExport, of course, along with a bunch of other things. Exporting is performed via the iExport interface through a series of creatable classes, such as export JPEG class, export PDF class, export TIFF class, and so on. So let's write some code to export the map layout to a JPEG. So to do that, we start with the iActive view. And then we create our export, but assign it to a new export JPEG class. And I don't have something added. Let's see what namespace that's in. I don't remember. Oh wait. Output, that's right. So we need to add a namespace we haven't used before, Esri ArcGIS output. Forgot about that. It still doesn't like that. Capitalization. And then we'll create a file name for our export. Use double for backslashes for C# too, so it won't be an escape character. So this will be the file name created by the export operation, and we'll set a resolution, say 300. This is where it gets a little tricky. We use something called a tag rect. It's a structure, or struct, that is used to define what part of the screen to draw. And we set its boundary based on the ActiveView export frame. So create a tag rect classed object called, that doesn't have an interface, xrect. And we'll set its start locations to 0 and 0. And then set the bottom and right to the bottom and right width and height of the export frame of the ActiveView. I said this has a bunch of weird steps to it, as I said. Then we need to create an envelope based on the struct's boundary. So we'll set the set the envelope boundaries to the tag rect boundaries. go on to the next page. We then have to set, there's so many similar things to set. We need to set export pixel boundaries to the envelope. And now here's where we actually export it. We need to create a system int32 object. I'll call it HDC. Then we set that to pexport start exporting. So this starts the process of exporting. Then once we've done that, the active view has a method output where we can pass it the start exporting variable from above, dots per inch, the rectangle representing the tag rect, and I can put null for the other two. Then we finish exporting and issue the command clean up. So let's give that a try. So let's see if that export worked. Oh, there it is. There's the JPEG file that it created. We can change this into an PDF export tool very easily, honestly, by just changing export JPEG class to export PDF class is all you really have to do. Although you might want to change some other properties. But I also should do change the file name. And now there's the PDF. Any questions about exporting? And obviously I don't go through each one, but there's a bunch of other other formats you could export to. Well, a couple more topics, and we're done with the lecture. We'll be done early today. We can spend some time, if you want. You can either leave early or we can review labs. Spatial references. Here we'll talk about the ARC objects that are used to define and set spatial references and map projections on layers and data frames. iSpatial reference info is another interface that gives us the properties of a specific spatial reference we're interested in. We can cast that from iSpatial reference, which we're about to talk about. Name gives us the spatial reference name. There's also a factory code, which is the representation of Esri's code number for the map projection. So I said Esri spatial reference is the class. We have Esri spatial reference and iSpatial reference info, inherited by spatial reference and iSpatial reference. So in this, I don't think I'll type all these out, but here speaking about style, this is similar to the style selectors we talked about earlier. You can use the iSpatial reference dialog and the spatial reference dialog class to bring up the menu that you're used to seeing that a user uses to select a spatial reference. So we do modal just like we do with the north arrow, and then that sets, the dialog sets to this PSRI the name of the reference that the user chose. So this dialog is a way that you can utilize the spatial reference dialog, say if you want the user to assign that with a dialog box. So adding this simple set of code lets the user choose the projection, and then it changes the data frame's projection. So here we have a focus map, and then pmap.spatial reference. The map has a spatial reference property. You just set it to an iSpatial reference, and we change the map projection. That's really what I have on projections. Are there any other questions? A couple final slides tonight. I call it help again. These are some other help resources. We talked a lot about help, looking up interfaces, classes, and so on earlier. Some additional help resources for you. In Visual Studio and object-oriented programming, we often have a concept called snippets, where you can find and steal or use a small set of code. Just a little piece of code that does a simple thing that you can insert into your code. When you install the ArcObjects SDK over Visual Studio, we get a set of ArcGIS snippets. So that's going off the screen. But there we go. Under IntelliSense, of all places, there's a ArcGIS snippet finder. And then you get the snippet menu. You can type a keyword representing what you are searching for. So this is a good way of finding a lot of existing code. I think it's good. Sometimes I'll do this, but then I'll look and see how they did it, and then I'll type it myself. That way I remember better what it's doing rather than just cutting and pasting. But you can certainly just cut and paste. So for example, I searched for symbol. There's a snippet called add north arrow. So that gives you a small piece of code for adding north arrow. You can see some other symbol, and then we paste this code in the appropriate location in your project. Create dynamic marker, create care markers. So there's all these little snippets that you could utilize. You can also, and I keep saying that I should do this, and I never do, but if you have specific code that you reuse, you can create your own snippets. At the bottom below IntelliSense, there's an ArcGIS snipper editor wizard. So if you have your own set, a little block of code that isn't included anywhere else, but you're going to be reusing it, you can select the piece of code that you're interested in, choose the wizard, give it a title, and then that will add it to the list of snippets. Obviously, in your I think that would only work on your user profile. If you look at the location it stores it, another user is not going to see that, but you would see these snippets that you create using the snippet editor wizard by yourself. You can also specify which namespace references are needed for your snippet and what product level it's compatible with. So here we're saying it works with all 3 levels of ArcView, ArcEditor, and ArcInfo. You might have a snippet that only works with ArcInfo if it's a complex solution. And you can also specify, it's a good idea, which namespaces your snippet requires. When you search, I can't remember if I pointed this out before, when you search on a class, like we did a couple of months ago, if there's a .NET snippet that uses that class, they will show it in the ArcObjects help. So here's a spatial reference dialog class. We just looked at that in the spatial reference section a few minutes ago. At the bottom of that help, they have a change map spatial reference snippet. So you can click and get the code from there. So these snippets are handy little 2 pieces of code that you could utilize. The online this website is no longer existing, this forums. I think they call it GeoNet now, and it's confusing. They have a site called GeoNet where you can discuss a variety of topics about ESRI software, including development. And each space, or each place, is a specific set of topics. Like for example, there's a place on here, ArcObjects STK. That one would be relevant to what we're learning in this class. So if you click on that, you can post. Here's someone that wrote a question about iDocument info. So you'll see questions about ArcObjects in this space on the GeoNet. So it's another resource that's available. That's the end of the lecture. Obviously, no need for a break. I will stick around if you want. Stop this.